Yes, thank you, Javier, for the kind words and for pronouncing my family name perfectly. Congratulations. And thanks for the kind invitation. Of course, that's a tough act to follow, not just because you all had lunch, but we already had two great presentations by Karsten from Germany and Roger from France. So naturally, you picked someone who's German and lives in France. So congratulations on the sequence of choosing the plenary speakers. So I'll talk about heterogeneity in household preferences and implications for energy policy and modeling. So this is some of the other work I've done or I'm currently doing in terms of energy efficiency. I also look at households, not just as companies. And so the topic or the focus of today's talk will be on the household sector. And just as a motivation, we already talked about the winter package, but actually the seed for this talk was set a couple of years ago with the previous decision of the European Council to set an energy efficiency target for 2030 of 27%. 27%, that's compared to a baseline development which was agreed upon. And that also translated into caps on primary energy and final energy. And what I'll talk about is not about discount rates, not in the sense that Roger has talked about in the previous talk, not in the normative sense, but in a positive sense. That is, discount rates are the key factor that are in these energy economic models that are used in EU impact assessments, for example, to drive agents' investment behavior. Our agents are households in this sense. And just to give you an indication of the importance of these discount rates, the way to think about them is the following. Suppose you observed a household that has purchased a not so energy efficient refrigerator, but it was cheap. But he also had the choice to purchase an energy efficient one, which was a little bit more expensive, but saved you lots of money along the way. So the discount rate or the rate that would make that choice, or presumably an inefficient choice, rational, that's the implicit discount rate. And that was actually at the core of a somewhat heated debate after the 27% target was announced, and was also titled "The Battle of the Discount Rates" and so on, and wasn't really well appreciated in the energy efficiency community. Just to give you an idea how these 27% were derived. The analysis behind, that's pretty much the impact assessment of the European Commission here. You do see as a function of the energy efficiency improvement, the costs, system costs, and here the benefits. And the two factors to be taken into account. One is okay, what are the benefits, and the types of benefits that were considered in that kind of analysis was mainly the reduction in imported fossil fuel costs. But the rate was set at the intersection of the cost and the benefit curves, and that happens to be the 27%. And a key factor underlying these analyses was the discount rate in the household sector, and that was 17.5%, which maybe low, maybe high, but in the energy efficiency community, this was considered to be extremely high. And since energy efficiency typically comes at cost savings over time, that means the higher your discount rate or your implicit discount rate you're using here, the less beneficial are investments in energy efficiency, because they typically come at higher upfront costs. So doing an alternative analysis by consultancy Ecole, and Ernst Worrell was involved, they included, first of all, additional benefits in terms of employment gains, and actually what you see here is the cost curve is below the zero line, meaning there are some called no regret potentials. But the crucial point here is they did apply a lower discount rate, implicit discount rate for the household factor of 10%, and they came up with a target of 35%. After that, the costs would outweigh the benefits of further energy efficiency improvement. we'll see what the winter package says at the end of this presentation. So discounting kills the future, as Roger said it, but in this sense, and this was a comic that was published by the energy efficiency community, we'd still be in the Stone Ages if we used the 17.5% discount rate, because we'd never do anything. I was just rephrasing what Roger put in a little bit less word and more pointed. So where do models get these implicit discount rates from? And there's an empirical literature that they surveyed, and you can look it up in the impact assessment, and they are derived from observed technology choices, and then they're trying to derive or econometrically estimate these implicit discount rates based on net present value calculations. And if you do that, what you typically find is that these implicit discount rates largely exceed the opportunity costs of capital. For example, for refrigerators, you see implicit discount rates between 34% and 300%. So it's almost a factor of 10. I don't know how they came up with the 17.5% then. That's the model, that's the leading, Prime's model is the leading model used by the European Commission for or one of the leading models used for the impact assessment. It's very detailed in terms of technologies and so on, but it uses the 17.5% for all technologies by private households in all countries. But if you go through the impact assessment or go through the description of the model, actually what's really behind this implicit discount rate is it's not really clear. There's some talk about barriers and so on, but behavioral factors, but it's not really clear. So the concept seems to be a little bit blurred, and the implications for policymaking are not that clear either. So what I wanted to do for the remainder of the talk, and I hope I can finish it, is present a framework of the factors that are underlying these implicit discount rates. And I also would like to present some very first results of an ongoing H2020 EU project where we implemented representative surveys in 8 EU countries trying to look at the heterogeneity of some of these underlying factors, provide you some first insights. And then finally, I'll discuss the implications for policymaking and modeling and evaluation of EU energy efficiency policy. Let's assume this corresponds to the implicit discount rate, and the underlying factors can be summarized, or we summarize them in 3 blocks. The first blocks we call preferences, just regular preferences, like what Roger has talked about, time preferences. We'd rather have a euro today than tomorrow or next year. And policy implications are rather clear too. You may give credits. People don't have to spend money today. Risk preferences, I think Roger alludes to that as well too. We're all economists, so that's something we feel familiar with. And maybe policy implication would be offering fixed interest rates rather than floating interest rates. Then reference-dependent preferences, that's something more, that's becoming more trendy to look at this from a behavioral economics perspective, but it has been long known in the psychology literature. And one example would be the loss aversion paper by Kahneman and Tversky, which means losses loom larger than gains. So when people evaluate projects, they tend to evaluate losses of the same amount as gains differently, up to a factor of 2 or so. Other examples are reference group matters, or keeping up with the Jonases, or if you're from the US, I guess today you call it keeping up with the Kardashians, if I'm well informed. So you're looking at your neighbors, what they do, and then you kind of let that influence your behavior. That may be easy for photovoltaic plants that everybody can see, but for energy efficiency investments, that's a little bit harder. You don't necessarily see the high performance boiler that your neighbor has in the basement. What's well researched, on the other hand, is the fourth component for preferences, so pro-environmental preferences, and they do have tend to have a positive uptake on energy efficiency investments, maybe because of social norms, because of internalized personal norms, because of pure altruism, or because it makes you feel good, the warm glow, if you're voluntarily contributing to a public good, as economists would frame this. The second box we call predictable irrational behavior, and it also includes several components. Bounded rationality, so even if you have all the information available that you need to make a rational decision, due to cognitive abilities, you just can't do it. Problems too complex, information too complex, and it's too difficult to process. So that's well known too. A bit less well known, maybe rational inattention. That refers to updating of information. If you're purchasing an energy efficient, or you consider purchasing an energy efficient light bulb or a new light bulb for a room that's not used very often, the attic, it may just not be worth going through the pain of figuring out what's the latest technology, what's the latest progress for LEDs and so on. So the choice you're making is actually rational. And then there are all kinds of behavioral biases, status quo bias, or present bias leading to hyperbolic discounting. I'd say most people would prefer 100 euros today to 150 euros in a year from now. But if you ask the same question, would you prefer 100 euros in 5 years versus 150 euros in 6 years from today? Most people would pick the 150 euros in 6 years, even though the time difference is exactly the same. So you may be able to guess the color of the third box. Given that we are in Italy, we call this external barriers to energy efficiency, and that's actually something that the models or the impact assessment, the models used for the impact assessment explicitly refer to. This is well studied. These are external to the decision maker, unlike the previous two boxes. Split incentive, the landlord-tenant problem, the one that's investing cannot recoup the costs because it's, in this case, a particular well-known example is the landlord-tenant problem. If the landlord cannot pass on the additional costs to the tenant, maybe because there are legal requirements not allowing you to pass them on, or because the tenant is not willing to pay for it, because he cannot judge on the energy efficiency savings, he may not have an incentive to do so. Or the tenant may not invest in it because he doesn't know whether he's going to be there long enough to enjoy the benefits. Another part is lack of information or transaction costs. If you don't know your energy consumption or don't know about the energy efficiency of the energy performance of goods, you have a hard time making the right decision. And also the new energy, the winter package refers to that, and typically labeling is employed, and it refers to adding more technologies to being covered by the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the extending the labeling also to other technologies than so far. Lack of capital is also a well-known one, maybe because of institutional constraints. The capital markets are not perfect. Then there's technological risk. New technologies incur different risks if they're not mature than standard technologies, or financial risks involved because of uncertainty about the future of energy prices, and thus the financial benefit of the investment. So of course, there are many other factors that I don't touch upon, but these are the ones that you see in the literature most. So you actually have these three types of barriers, and you could then also think about policies. Well, policies in the first place, they try to lower this implicit discount rate. Yeah, that's the target. And some policies they take, or one type of policy is, okay, you're trying to directly lower the implicit discount rate by addressing these barriers directly, or more indirect policies or responsive policies. They take the preferences as given, they take the behavior as given, and try to exploit them. Nudging policies, for example, has become very popular in that sense. Okay, and households tend to differ in all these dimensions. And what we're doing here in this EU project, we look at some of the behavioral and preference dimensions and see, and in the first step, we want to see, okay, how spread out are they? How homogeneous is the population with respect to risk preferences, time preferences, loss aversion, and so on? And we've implemented identical surveys in 8 European countries, representative surveys: France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Romania, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. A proposal was written before the Brexit, obviously. Our results, okay. So we asked in total 1,500, typically 2,000 or 15,000 households. So it's typically 2,000 or 1,500 per country, 2,000 in the larger countries and 1,500 in the smaller countries. Preferences were elicited through multiple price list experiments, and we incentivized 50% of the participants. It's a fairly large share. And typically, if you don't know what a multiple price list is, participants are given a choice between 2 projects, A and B, and they are asked something like, okay, would you rather receive 98 euros today or 100 euros 6 months from today? And then they go through this list and then they pick either A or B, and that allows you to derive a parameter reflecting time preferences. So these are the results for time preferences. More patient countries, these are country averages for the parameters we estimated. More patient countries are to the right. Anyone wants to guess what the most patient country is according to this elicitation method? Or the least patient one? France is the most patient one. I was surprised driving in the small roads in the Grenoble area. I don't have the impression the French drivers are particularly patient, but maybe that's not a good indicator predicting driving behavior. We'll see if it's a good indicator predicting adoption of energy efficient technologies. And then we got Romania on the left, very much to the left. But actually what you see, there are not that many differences between Germany, UK, Sweden, and France. So a little bit here, but there's some variance. Risk aversion, okay, given you the solution. I could have asked again, but I figured by now you would have known the colors of the country, and then would have been an easy guess. We see that Poland is the least risk-averse country, and Sweden actually the most risk-averse country, according to these measures. Finally, loss aversion. More loss-averse countries to the right, less loss-averse countries to the left. And again, these are just country averages. Yeah? So don't not to over-interpret this. Just showing that there is some heterogeneity. For example, we don't have the same currency, so we had to translate the currencies and so on. So there may be some effects going on. But still, just to give you an indication of the kind of results we're finding here. France is the one, is the least loss-averse. The most loss-averse country. Actually, I think if you correlated this to the share of populous country loss aversion, you do get a positive correlation. It's just with 8 countries, the sample is not very large. Okay, but then what's interesting is, okay, so what's correlated with these preferences? And just one example. So this is all, I should say, this is all very preliminary. We're still working on this, but just to give you a flavor of the type of findings we get is, so if we're regressing our parameter of loss aversion on a couple of socioeconomic factors, we see that men are less loss averse, higher income households are less loss averse, older people are less loss averse, no statistically significant effect for education, and then we do have an effect of whether respondents were incentivized or not. So does this really matter? So, okay, nice, you do have heterogeneity across your countries and also across households within countries, of course. Does it really matter for technology adoption, for energy efficient technology adoption? And one result here is we looked at light bulbs and a couple other technologies, but this is really just the first set of results we're getting, and this is actually not on a country-by-country basis, just throwing them all in one regression. And what you see here, okay, risk preferences not correlated with adoption of an LED, but time discounting. So this is the way to translate this. This is the time discounting factor. So more patient people are more likely to adopt LEDs, just as we would have expected. We do have a present bias. So people suffering from less present bias are more likely to adopt LEDs. Loss aversion did not turn out to be statistically significant. Oops, jump down here. Yeah, gender effect, male respondents are more likely to report that they purchased an LED. Richer households and so on. And then also here an interesting one in terms of the split incentives effect, the landlord-tenant effect. If they're more likely to move in the future, they're less likely to adopt energy-efficient technologies, just as a theory would predict. Then we also included CRT scores. They're capturing cognitive ability of respondents, and the new environmental paradigm score capturing attitudes towards the environment, and both come out as expected. So what are the implications for modeling and policy design evaluations? Spent my last 3.5 minutes on that. In terms of modeling, I mean, the modelers would have to know the change, coming back to where we started from, in the implicit discount rates in response to policies. That's a very hard thing to do. If you wanted to model that correctly, you'd have to know by how much. And you'd have to identify the underlying individual factors. For example, raising energy taxes will increase the opportunity cost of looking for new information. So it will address rational inattention, but it would not be effective in terms of addressing bounded rationality. Or low interest credit would address lack of capital, but not if households are debt averse. And there may be differences in debt aversion across countries. I'm coming from one where I would guess it's very debt averse. Also, just observing high implicit discount rates doesn't really provide guidance for policy making, because you don't really know, why is that discount rate high? Is it because of environmental preferences? If they're really, really strong, the radical environmentalists, as Roger referred to, we may actually see a negative implicit discount rate. Or is it because of risk preferences, loss aversion, and so on? So that's not clear. Also, observing a correlation with socioeconomic factors and implicit discount rates doesn't really help you much. Typically, what you see is lower income is associated with higher implicit discount rates, but you don't know what the underlying factors is. Is it because lower income households are more risk averse, are less patient, are more loss averse, are less environmental sensitive? So there is a need to identify the underlying correlation. And the next challenge is, okay, you'd have to model the change in the implicit discount rates in response to policy intervention, and modeling this would probably require implicit discount rates to vary by household characteristics. We've seen some ideas on that. Also by technologies. Technologies that are more risky, maybe they should have a higher implicit discount rate. Also, experimental evidence has shown that people tend to be more risky when the stakes are higher. So whether you're purchasing an energy-efficient light bulb or for, I don't know, a couple of euros, or whether you're renovating your house for 50,000 euros, should make a difference. So far, the energy economic, typically bottom-up models, they're pretty good at representing technologies, technological change. They're also pretty good at at capturing the effects of standard setting, but they're less good at reflecting the behavioral dimensions. How do households react to information, additional informations, or nudging, other forms of nudging? So there's need for additional empirical work. I would like to close with the final slide on the winter package. So you may wonder, okay, what's the target in the winter package? Is it 27? Is it 35%? And somewhere in the middle, it's 30%. And the modeling actually responded to some of the critique. First of all, you see the implicit discount rates that were being employed for private cars, 11%, household renovation, 14.75%, and appliance choice, 13.5%. So there is some variation in the discount rates. It's actually a threefold in variation, but starting from a very low number, 1. And also what you see is how the implicit discount rates change in response to policy interventions. It's just not clear what explains the change of, I don't know, 3 or 4%. How did that happen? So that's still a black box. Okay, with pictures of my institutes in Germany and in Grenoble, it's obvious which one is where. I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Joachim.